Hello everyone and welcome to this new video. Today I'm talking to Ilya from Feline Studios. Can you introduce yourself?
Hey, sure. So my name is Ilya and I'm the game designer and programmer and the team lead of Valin, a small team consisting of people from various countries. We're currently working on a game called Shores Unknown.
In a nutshell, what kind of game are we talking about?
So yeah, Shores Unknown is a kind of unique tactical role-playing game with an indirect battle system, which means that instead of giving direct orders to each of your characters like you would do in a normal tactical RPG, what you have instead is multiple parties consisting of multiple characters, and you command them around sort of like you would if you were an actual commander on a battlefield. So instead of saying use your ability A on a unit B, you say, why don't you intercept that party over there? And they will then move on and do what they can using their abilities, using their AI.
So they can think for their own.
Yep, pretty much.
Why did you choose to make a game like this?
So I was always a fan of RPGs and tactical games, turn-based strategy games, games like Jagged Alliance 2, and games like XCOM and so on. But as time passed, as I grew older, I came to a realization that I can't really find the time to play, the usual grid-based, turn-based games anymore. And I was looking for, something different, something more streamlined, with less micromanagement, so to say. And I realized that this is an open niche, basically. There's really not many games which do this. So I decided to make my own.
Did the game become what you already planned it to become before the start of the development?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I think in a way it did. When I was initially planning to work on it, I was kind of envisioning it as a mobile game, and we'll talk about that later. But I actually have a pretty deep background as a mobile game designer, so that's how it started. But then when I actually started prototyping it, I kind of pivoted away from mobile, and it just became a normal consumer single player game.
What inspired you to become an indie game developer?
Yeah, so a little bit about me. I started working in game development about 10 years earlier. Back when I was living in Russia, my first job was as game QA in one of the Russian localization companies that basically got me inside the industry. And I always wanted to kind of make games. Ever since my childhood, I was making games on paper with pencil for my classmates to play with, stuff like that. We didn't really have Dungeons and Dragons back then, so we just had to come up with things ourselves. And then games like Warcraft 2, Heroes of Might and Magic 2. Those games were a very important part of my life, and not just playing them, but also making maps in map editors for those. And that's what actually got me started, modding, making things myself in gaming. But going back to game industry. So I was working in various Russian studios for about 7 years, I think, in various roles, starting from QA to game design to game analyst. And in 2016, I decided to make a move to Japan and try working here in Japan in Japanese game industry. I joined a company called Q Games around summer 2016, and I stayed there for 2 years, kind of learning from people. And they're very, kind of indie company. Basically, they are pretty small, and there's a lot of really cool ideas and really unique games they're trying to make. And that kind of gave me an idea to maybe try and make something completely on my own. So yeah, recently I actually decided to branch off from Q Games and work on my own project, which is how we got here.
So this isn't your first game, or is it?
No, it's not my first game. I actually have 3 released titles as a game designer, all 3 of which are mobile. And I've worked on several pretty well-known titles as in a QA role, including online RPGs such as Ion, and including well-known games such as, you know, Overlord 2, for example, or Supreme Commander 2.
That's actually games I know. That doesn't happen a lot.
Right.
I often have people like, I like this successful game and I've never heard about it.
Okay. Well, I didn't make Overlord 2 or anything, but at least I tested it.
Well, that's by almost the same. Almost.
Oh, all right.
It's close. For what platforms do you intend to release your game?
So yeah, I initially started the development aiming for PC release, so Steam and GameJolt and so on, all the various PC stores. But we recently got into a partnership with a publisher called HitSense, which are based in America, and that gave us a chance to also bring the game to Nintendo Switch, which is something that we're very excited about.
What are the biggest inspiration for making this game?
Okay, so I have a number of favorite games of mine, and a number of favorite books of mine actually inspired me. In terms of gameplay, probably a game called The Last Remnant, a Square Enix game, kind of, which looked like Final Fantasy but wasn't, and played very differently. And they sort of did something similar to what we're trying to do with our battle, where you were basically leading, you know, your troops around as a battle commander, rather than, you know, commanding individual characters. And that's one of my favorite games and battle systems. So that was a very big inspiration, definitely. And in terms of, you know, story approach and so on, I mean, I pretty much grew up playing games such as Baldur's Gate, Planescape Torment, all those classical Infinity Engine-based RPGs. So there's definitely a lot of inspiration from those in terms of how we approach the story, how we approach the dialogue, the character progression, the dungeons, and so on.
Besides the battle system, what makes this game different from others?
Besides the battle system, so we're making a pretty big accent on story and how story interacts with you as the player. And I don't want to spoil anything, but let's say it's a pretty original story. It's a pretty interesting narrative that the team that is working on it, are very proud of, and would definitely like our players to experience it in fullest. And it's obviously, it has choices, it has consequences, and it also, you know, it's somewhat self-conscious of it, despite being, you know, a fantasy game. We don't have elves and orcs, and we have something different.
No elves and orcs.
No elves and orcs, yeah.
What do you think is the most interesting part of the game, besides the battle system?
Battle system is definitely one of the most interesting parts of the game for me. But that said, I mean, yeah, we're trying to keep it balanced in terms of the different systems in the game, and you won't be battling all the time. You'll also be, you know, participating in all the regular RPG things, exploring dungeons, running around forests, talking to people, doing quests, and so on. And we're also we've been spending some time lately, you know, designing a somewhat unique approach to, you know, the mission progression and the quest progression in the game. And the big point of the game is that you're not just a random guy or girl, an adventurer who's trying to make a name for themselves, but you're rather a mercenary company leader. So rather than just fighting for your own self, you also have to work on expanding your mercenary company, keeping it afloat, earning money, finding new resources, finding new recruits, and so on. And we imagine there's going to be a system focused on your mercenaries, which would feel, I guess, a bit more strategic than a normal RPG. So you'd have like a base, and you'd need to upgrade this base, you'd need to send people on tasks, and these tasks are not just, click there, go there, but they're interactive and they're tied to your main quest progression, and the mission that you're participating in with your main party, so to say, can also be supported by your mercenaries, which are being sent to a variety of missions. And they can fail, and if they do fail, there are going to be consequences such as harder fights, additional fights, maybe a different quest appears, stuff like that.
What game engine are you using, and why did you decide to work with this engine?
We're using Unreal Engine 4, and initially I actually have a pretty big background working in Unity professionally. In my previous companies, Unity was what we used, and I honestly wanted to try something new and learn something new. So initially, when I was about to start prototyping, it was sort of also a learning process for me, learning the ropes of Unreal Engine 4. And as my understanding of the engine improved, I kind of realized that it's a really, robust, powerful engine, which just provides a very, very good tool set for the developer. Whereas in Unity, a lot of things you just have to make from scratch, pretty much.
What settlements did you encounter during the project, and do you feel like you learned anything from them?
So we had to redesign. Setbacks. When I was prototyping the battle, I actually had to remake it completely once, because the initial battle was just wasn't working for me, and there was definitely a lot of Unreal Engine learning curve related issues and problems and little quirks that I had to learn as I moved. But it's also my first project in a programmer capacity. I did some programming before and made some games in school and so on, but those were pretty simple. I've never really coded anything professionally. So this was definitely a very big hurdle to overcome for me. But I think it also made me a better game designer, having to solve a lot of problems that programmers and engineers normally solve, and a lot of people playing games just take for granted. And when you start making a game yourself, you suddenly realize that they're not. Right. Other than that, I mean, we're still kind of working on improving our UI, because since the combat is so unique and there's so many things going on at once, we are always, struggling to make sure that we're showing all this information in an accessible way to the player. And we've just recently teased a fresh redesign of the battle UI for our game, which is actually Shores Unknown is actually in a closed beta state right now on Steam. We're just giving people keys, basically invite based, and we're testing battle systems, we're testing a bit of exploration, we're testing progression, stuff like that, and we're also testing basically accumulating feedback on how the UI works. So, and we're about to push the UI update to Steam as well. and would be very interested in hearing how people react to that, because it's very different to what we had before, but it's also a lot more streamlined, and you don't really have to think about what you're trying to do that much as you did before. And a lot of things can now just be achieved by clicking a button a couple of times without having to think where that button is or what it does.
If you could go back in time, what would you do different?
That's an interesting question. I would probably make it a game about. I would maybe make it a sci-fi game, and not a fantasy game as it is right now.
Why?
But honestly, that's just an idea of mine that kind of appeared as we were developing Shores, and it's just something I might want to explore later. But I really feel that this battle system can also work in a sci-fi environment, and there's also of course the marketing aspect of it, like sci-fi and fantasy. Fantasy is, as people say, over-saturated right now. Then you could say the same about sci-fi, I guess, but there's not a lot of sci-fi strategy RPGs around, is there? And on the other hand, there's a lot of tactical fantasy RPGs, and we have to try very hard to make sure that we are standing out from the crowd.
If you can advise a new indie game developer, what will you tell him?
Well, first thing is you only live once, so don't do something you don't consider fun and don't love yourself, and especially being indie, and make sure you establish a solid income for yourself before you start working on anything professionally, because if you start working on a game of your dream without having any money, it's going to fail, and you're going to be very unhappy about it, and you probably won't be making any games anymore. So take care of yourself.
Okay, well, that's a really important thing, to take care of yourself.
Yeah, I honestly think, I mean, I don't know, we might as well discuss it, but I think the psychological aspect of game development, and especially indie game development, is something that has been downplayed for a very long time, and it's recently just started receiving some exposure. But a lot of people just burn themselves out working on their games without having an actual proper strategy. And I know, because I've made the same mistake myself, working 7 days per week for like 16 hours per day, and then just the next week you wake up and you think, do I really want to do this? Should I just take a break? Something like that. And so it's really important to really kind of understand yourself, what's going on in your head, and plan it out. And a lot of people, especially in indie game dev, because they don't have the experience of working professionally, they don't really understand the project management side of it. They don't really plan things ahead. They don't manage their tasks, and they don't manage their time. And that's, I think, a very important skill for any game developer.
What do you feel is success for an indie game developer?
Having your game recognized and played by other people, and hopefully being receiving good press and reviews and so on, and generally being accepted as an enjoyable and memorable experience. And that's one stage of success, I guess. And then there's the other stage of success, where the game that you actually released as an indie game developer allows you to make more games as indie game developers. And not many indie game developers can say they have achieved that.
To make other game developers learn, what resources would you recommend?
Google.
Google.
But no, honestly, I think that, often people are trying to look for, like, I often see it, on Reddit or on Unreal Engine forums or something, like, can you recommend me a good book which explains how to use Unreal Engine 4? And the problem with this stuff is that, books, they take time and they get outdated very quickly in the environment that is, the game development environment. And that's where Google really comes helpful, is it's always up to date, basically. Although you, of course, have to be careful to, not pick up any wrong lessons from it, I guess.
What do you think about the current marketing strategies in the indie game industry?
That's really a very interesting question. So, which current marketing strategies are we talking about? Can you give me a couple of examples?
Well, it's marketing strategies, so it can be like you post a game on Twitter, will it work, or you post a game on Facebook, or you can even go to the PR side of things and imagine that you send a game to press and what you think about the strategies of doing that.
Okay. Well, so I think, like right now, game industry is overloaded. There's a lot of talk of, indie apocalypse or whatever. And the thing is, if you look at Steam, at new releases and so on, there's so many games releasing every day that even if you're making a genuinely good game, there's a very good chance that if you don't do anything, no one will notice, right? Mm-hmm. So the only strategy in this case, I think, is, making yourself seen, making yourself visible, talking to people, getting the word around, basically using, and I mean, there isn't really any single strategy in this. You can't just use Twitter and not use Facebook and not use Reddit because you don't like Reddit or whatever, right? Because I mean, you're if you don't do that, if you don't use one of those channels, you're basically shooting yourself in the foot. And the same kind of applies to networking with people, and especially in game dev. There's a lot of things that just can't really be solved without knowing the right people and knowing the right people to talk to. And it's not only just the PR side of things. It's sometimes you're looking for that amazing recruit, and it's really, really hard to find the right person for the job sometimes without having someone who knows that person. So definitely we should make sure, all the game developers working on their indie games, we should make sure that we are not doing it in a vacuum. And I know that I've seen examples of people who are just too shy to show their game or something, or just don't think it's important, because of course PR takes time, and if you're working on a game alone, then you're the only person doing the programming, doing the art, doing the PR as well. And people who don't know anything about that, they tend to skip the PR thing, and that's a very big mistake, I think.
It is. Where do you see the indie market going within a few years?
Globally, I don't see it going anywhere. As in, it won't die. The apocalypse won't happen. And I think it will continue, with interesting original game ideas being released and being made, and a lot of smaller indie games also being released. As for, it's quite hard to tell in terms of, how the platforms are going to progress, because there's been talks of new console hardware, PlayStation 5 announcement happening sometime soon, maybe, I don't know. Then there is a lot of talks about streaming services. Like recently, Microsoft, I think, announced that they're doing something for game streaming. I think there is also a Google initiative very centered on that. So chances are that in a few years we might not be buying any more consoles or PCs and just using our PC to basically stream a game the same way that we stream music or videos nowadays, because I mean that's kind of where the future is, right? And I think that's also a very big, opportunity for indie devs, because if you get your games noticed by the big platforms holders, then imagine like every Google user in the world could be exposed to your game. That is billions of people, right? So that's just something to consider.
Which indie game developers, if any, offered you any support or knowledge in creating this game?
Too many to count, really. I would definitely. Do I count my team as other indie developers, because they're definitely indie?
Well, they are indie game developers.
Yeah, and they absolutely helped me. And I mean, this game wouldn't be happening if not for the team that's making this game with me. And of course, all the other people on the forums, on Reddit, and answering questions, and generally just being helpful. People on Twitter, you, Eddie, just now talking to me. I think all of this is basically, helping each other. And the whole indie game dev business is about helping each other, I think.
Is there an AAA studio you would work for if you could?
I honestly, I wanted to work in AAA for a while, and I've been doing some interviews. It didn't work out. Right now, I'm completely focused on developing my own projects. Though I think that AAA game development is a very interesting aspect of development, and it's definitely a worthwhile experience for a game developer to try and accumulate, just to see how those big games are made. Speaking of specific developers, I think working at CD Projekt Red for me would be very interesting, because I'm a huge fan of Witcher games, and I really like what they did to the RPG genre with Witcher 3 especially. And I just think they're genuinely doing a very good job, and they really care about their craft and their games, and not just about earning a lot of money like some other AAA developers.
Which game, either indie or AAA, wish you had worked on? Do you wish you had worked on?
Aside from Witcher 3, I mean, I would, if I ever had a chance to work on a game like Baldur's Gate 2, one of those big, sprawling, classical RPGs that I grew up playing, or maybe a game like the recently released Pathfinder Kingmaker. That would be a very interesting experience, I think, for me.
Have you ever worked for other gaming companies?
Yeah. So yeah, as I talked a bit earlier, I worked for a few gaming companies in Russia, mostly in mobile, and here in Japan I worked for Q Games, who made such games as the Pixel Junk series, Pixel Junk Monsters. They recently released Pixel Junk Monsters 2 as well, and I specifically in Q Games worked on the recently released Eden Obscure game as an analyst.
Did you have any gaming education at school, or did you learn the whole development process on your own?
So I wouldn't really call it, gaming education, but schools in Russia, at least, during my period of school, all had programming lessons, and they were really, technical kind of oriented. So, and programming lessons, for us, it was about, making simple things in more than Pascal. And those simple things, involved some simple games as well. In fact, I think in 10th grade, I had to make a simple, Arkanoid game as well. But, I mean, that's not really gaming education, is it? It's just programming.
Well, you are using the programming to make your games, so
yeah,
it does fit in.
Sure. I mean, it was definitely worthwhile, I think, and I mean, you know, people should, you know, schools should be doing this really, because it allows people to, you know, make things by coding, and it's just a good skill to have.
I agree. I believe that Dutch schools are introducing it within a few years to have programming lessons standard in the class package.
Yeah, I think Russian schools actually kind of stopped doing that some time ago. I'm not too sure, but I think they did, and I think that really is a shame, because, you know, there's a lot of good in doing those lessons, and those lessons are actually, you know, one of the few, you know, lessons that I personally remember as being, you know, genuinely fun, because, you know, you're not just learning a lesson, but rather trying to make something your own using the tools given to you and explained to you by the teacher.
Where did you grow up?
Yeah, so I was born in Russia, in Moscow, or near Moscow, right? And I spent most of my childhood days in Moscow as well. Yeah, playing games, learning how to make games.
What were your childhood interests?
So yeah, other than games, obviously, I always read a lot of books, and, you know, all my friendships and so on were always centered either on games or on, you know, books and stuff like that. And we didn't really have internet. At least I didn't have internet, not even dial-up, until, like, you know, 2003 or so. So rather than using internet, I had to, you know, use other sources to kind of accumulate information. And, you know, one other hobby of mine, which is still a hobby of mine, music. And I've always been like a, you know, a bit of a music buff, mostly just, you know, listening to a lot of stuff. I also tried playing a bit of guitar, but I never did really became good at that.
You can't be good at everything.
Yeah, that's very true.
What is your favorite video game of all time?
That would be Planescape Torment.
And your favorite video game of this year?
Let's think. I would say, I mean, this year isn't over yet.
It isn't.
Yeah, but
Imagine me asking this in January 1.
I mean, so far I'm thinking God of War. And as for why, I've never been a huge, you know, fan of previous God of War titles, and the whole series in general just didn't interest me. You know, it felt like this shallow, edgy slasher about this guy who's constantly angry and killing everyone. And I was like, okay, I can just play Devil May Cry. But then the new game came, and it's amazing how they've managed to, you know, completely overturn the expectations and completely, you know, redeem the series and just make it, you know, really deep on both the gameplay level and the, you know, the nuance of the characterization of Kratos. So and the
Kratos
kid
is no longer just the angry guy.
Yeah. Like it's really amazing, and the voice actors and the motion capture actors, they all did an amazing job. And it's just, I mean, this is one of the very few games which feel like they actually belong to, you know, to this year, to this generation of gaming, because they kind of, you know, they kind of really try to move the industry forward. And that's what AAA should be about, really, you know, moving the industry forward and not just, you know, rehashing the same game for yet another time every year. So, yeah, God of War, I think, is a really big and important title. But I'm also kind of looking forward for the new Red Dead Redemption. I also recently bought the new Assassin's Creed game, and I really liked what they did with Assassin's Creed in the previous installment in Origins. We played that with my wife, and we really enjoyed it, and just felt really good and fresh compared to all the recent previous Assassin's Creeds. So I'm kind of cautiously optimistic about the new one, and it seems like they're kind of abandoning their Assassin's roots entirely and just making it about being a fantasy Greece kind of RPG setting with a action combat mechanic. That could be a good thing as well, right? And I'm also quite excited for the one I mentioned recently, Pathfinder Kingmaker, because it's a game that's close to those games that I really liked in my childhood, and it's based on modified Dungeons and Dragons rules, and I really like Dungeons and Dragons. So yeah, definitely hoping that would be a good game as well.
That was the last question I had. Do you have other things you want to say?
Yeah, I hope this was an interesting interview, and I definitely hope that everyone listening to it will take a look at our game and check it out. Maybe join our Discord, say hi, and we don't bite. We'd be happy to have everyone.
All the links will be in the description below.
Cool, and thank you so much for giving me this chance to talk. And
well, thank you for your time. Because without you, I wouldn't be able to do this.
Thanks.